"Go back to sleep, kid. This isn't your business," came the dismissive voice from the row behind. Outside, desperate pilots radioed, "We're locked on target. Need assistance." The intercom crackled. "Is anyone aboard? A combat pilot?" Mocking laughter. "On a civilian flight? Seriously?" The girl in row 10 looked up, slowly opening her deep eyes, pulling a worn silver patch from her pocket. In an instant, military radio fell silent, then broadcast a single name: Falcon's Heir. The overnight flight from Lisbon to Chicago was settling into its routine, as passengers found their seats and prepared for departure. The cabin was nearly full, carry-on luggage secured, flight attendants making final checks. Mara Falk, 27 years old, rushed through the aircraft door just minutes before closing, breathing heavily from her sprint through the terminal. She wore a simple white button-down shirt and a dark business skirt, her long brown hair flowing naturally over her shoulders, clutching a worn canvas bag, sweat visible on her collar from the hurried journey. She drew disapproving glances from several passengers who clearly viewed her late arrival as inconsiderate. As Mara struggled to lift her carry-on into the overhead compartment, she accidentally bumped the luggage belonging to a large man in seat 11C. His reaction was immediate and harsh. "You young office workers," he scoffed loudly, "getting on planes like you're boarding a city bus." No sense of proper etiquette. Several passengers chuckled at his comment, while an elderly woman whispered to her companion, "Some people have no manners whatsoever." Mara immediately bowed her head in apology. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disturb you," her voice quiet and respectful. The man in 11C continued his criticism. "Young people these days? No understanding of protocol or respect for others." Settling into row 10, Mara quietly adjusted her wrinkled shirt and remained silent despite the continued stares and whispered comments from nearby passengers. The atmosphere around her was thick with judgment and dismissal. As she placed her canvas bag on her lap, the edge fell open slightly, revealing a glimpse of a silver patch with what appeared to be a small Falcon emblem. The metal looked aged and worn, suggesting it had seen significant history. Most passengers paid no attention to this small detail, but an elderly gentleman in seat 12D caught sight of the patch. His weathered eyes suddenly sparked with recognition, and he whispered almost inaudibly to himself, "Falcon, it can't be possible." The old man continued studying Mara with newfound interest, noting details that others missed: the way she sat with perfect posture despite appearing relaxed, how her eyes seemed to process everything around her with methodical precision, the calm confidence that underlied her apologetic demeanor. But the other passengers saw only what they expected to see: a young woman who had disrupted their comfortable evening flight, someone who clearly didn't belong in their orderly world of business travel and established routines. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate and began its taxi toward the runway, conversations turned to other topics, and Mara seemed to fade into the background. She closed her eyes as if preparing to sleep, but something in her breathing pattern suggested she was actually listening, not just to the ambient noise of the cabin, but to something beyond what others could hear. The man in 11C settled back into his seat with satisfaction. Having established his dominance over the inconsiderate young woman, he had no idea that he had just insulted someone whose capabilities would soon redefine everyone's understanding of who deserved respect on this flight. Outside the aircraft windows, the lights of Lisbon grew smaller as they climbed into the Atlantic night. It seemed like a routine flight with routine passengers, but hidden in row 10 was someone carrying a legacy that could command the respect of military forces across multiple continents. The old gentleman in 12D continued watching Mara with growing certainty. He had seen that look before, in military briefing rooms and combat zones. Whatever that silver patch represented, it carried weight that none of the other passengers could possibly comprehend. 30 minutes into the flight, as most passengers settled into their entertainment or attempted to sleep, an unexpected transmission crackled through the cabin's communication system. Raptor flight, lost data link, unable to engage. The fragmented military radio chatter caused confusion among the passengers. Some looked around nervously, while others seemed annoyed by the interruption to their peaceful flight. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some minor radio interference. This does not affect our flight safety in any way." While other passengers accepted this explanation and returned to their activities, Mara remained perfectly still with her eyes closed, but her breathing had changed subtly. She was listening with an intensity that suggested she understood far more about what they had just heard than anyone else aboard. The radio interference continued, and fragments of increasingly urgent communications filtered through. "We're locked on target. Low fuel. Need immediate assistance." The cabin began buzzing with nervous conversation. Some passengers laughed uncomfortably, treating the situation as an odd curiosity, while others expressed growing concern about what they were hearing. The situation escalated when the captain's voice returned, this time with a note of urgency that he was trying to mask. "Is there anyone aboard who has experience as a combat pilot? We have a situation that requires immediate consultation." The request was met with a mixture of nervous laughter and bewildered comments throughout the cabin. "A combat pilot? On a civilian flight? What are the odds of that?" someone called out mockingly. The man in seat 11C, who had earlier criticized Mara, turned toward her row with a sneer. "Go back to sleep, kid. This isn't your business. Let the adults handle whatever's happening." His comment drew chuckles from nearby passengers who seemed to find humor in the suggestion that a young woman in business attire could possibly be relevant to a military emergency. Mara slowly opened her eyes, and, for the first time since boarding, her gaze carried a sharpness that seemed to cut through the dismissive atmosphere around her. But she remained silent, not moving from her seat. A flight attendant, recognizing the gravity of the situation developing outside their aircraft, approached Mara's row hesitantly. "Excuse me, miss. The captain is asking for any assistance from passengers with relevant experience." The request caused another round of mocking comments from the man in 11C and his supporters. "Seriously? You're asking office workers now? This is getting ridiculous." Mara slowly sat up straighter, her white shirt crisp despite the journey, her hand moving instinctively to secure her canvas bag. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but carried an authority that seemed to come from nowhere. "Guard frequency 243.0. Keep it clear for 10 seconds. The technical precision of her response caused the nearby flight attendant to freeze. Those weren't the words of someone playing along with an unusual situation. They were the precise terminology of someone with genuine military aviation knowledge. The elderly gentleman in seat 12D leaned forward slightly, his suspicions confirmed. "Those eyes? I've seen them before. On pilots preparing for combat missions." But the man in 11C wasn't finished with his criticism. "Now she's pretending to know military procedures? This is embarrassing. Someone needs to tell her to stop making a fool of herself." Other passengers began taking sides, some finding the situation amusing, others growing uncomfortable with the mounting tension in the cabin. But Mara remained focused, no longer the apologetic young woman who had stumbled aboard late and disrupted everyone's evening. The radio chatter outside was becoming increasingly desperate. Fuel critical. Hostiles maintaining lock. Require immediate tactical support. It was becoming clear that whatever was happening outside their civilian aircraft was escalating into a genuine military crisis. And the pilots in distress needed help that conventional air traffic control couldn't provide. Mara's demeanor had completely transformed. The nervous, apologetic young woman was gone, replaced by someone with quiet confidence and precise awareness of everything happening around her. She was no longer hiding. She was preparing. The flight attendant looked back toward the cockpit, clearly torn between the captain's urgent request for help and the social dynamics playing out in the cabin. The situation required someone with genuine expertise, but the most qualified-seeming person was being dismissed by other passengers as an attention-seeking young woman. The man in 11C continued his commentary. This is what happens when people watch too many movies. Now everyone thinks they're a hero. But the elderly gentleman in 12D was studying Mara with growing respect. He recognized something in her posture, in the way she processed information, in her quiet confidence despite the mockery around her. This wasn't someone pretending to be something she wasn't. This was someone who had been trained for exactly this type of situation. The radio transmissions were becoming more urgent by the moment, and it was clear that lives hung in the balance. The aircraft's crew needed genuine expertise, and time was running out to find it. Mara reached into her canvas bag and withdrew the silver patch, holding it carefully in her palm. The metal caught the cabin light, revealing intricate details that spoke of official military insignia rather than casual memorabilia. The moment of decision had arrived, and everyone aboard was about to discover who was really sitting in row 10. The cabin fell into tense silence as Mara stood up from row 10, her white shirt immaculate, her movements precise and purposeful. She walked toward the cockpit with the confident stride of someone who belonged there. Without hesitation, she pressed the worn silver patch against the metal wall next to the aircraft's internal communications system. Her voice, when she spoke, carried absolute authority. Falcon's Heir. Lineage echo. The immediate response was electric. The military radio chatter that had been fragmenting through their system suddenly went completely silent, as if the entire sky was holding its breath. Then NORAD's voice crackled through with unmistakable urgency. Falcon's Heir, authenticate immediately. Mara responded with a rapid sequence of codes that flowed from her lips like a native language. The authentication was brief, precise, and clearly recognized by military command structures operating far beyond the commercial aviation system. The response from the F-22 pilots outside was immediate and reverent. Confirmed. Falcon's Heir, ma'am. Awaiting your instructions. In that instant, everything changed. The sky itself seemed to reorganize around Mara's voice. Weapon systems that had been locked in deadly standoff suddenly stood down. Flight corridors that had been restricted opened immediately. Emergency protocols that had been escalating toward potential tragedy shifted into coordinated resolution. The passengers in the cabin sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that the young woman they had been dismissing was someone with authority that reached into the highest levels of military command. The man in seat 11C, who had been so vocal in his criticism, was now pale and sweating, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. He stared at Mara as if seeing her for the first time. realizing that his mockery had been directed at someone whose capabilities he couldn't even comprehend. A senior flight attendant quietly began documenting the earlier incidents of passenger interference, making it clear that formal complaints would be filed against those who had attempted to prevent Mara from responding to the emergency. One of the elderly women who had whispered about Mara's lack of manners now spoke in hushed, embarrassed tones. Didn't he call her kid just a few minutes ago? The irony was lost on no one. The man in 11C was required to sign an official report acknowledging his interference with emergency procedures, his face burning with shame as he realized the magnitude of his error in judgment. Through the aircraft's communication system, Mara issued rapid, precise instructions to the military pilots outside. Vector 090. Maintain altitude 35,000. Establish protective corridor. Weapons safe. Acknowledge. Roger, Falcon's Heir. Vector 090. Altitude maintained. Corridor established. Weapons safe. The radar screens in distant control centers showed the immediate results of her commands. Aircraft that had been locked in potentially deadly confrontation reorganized into protective formation. Threat indicators shifted from red to green. What had been a crisis spiraling toward international incident became a textbook example of tactical coordination. The passengers watched in amazement as this young woman in a business skirt commanded military assets with the same ease that others might order coffee. Her authority was absolute. Her expertise undeniable. Her impact immediate. The elderly gentleman in seat 12D nodded with quiet satisfaction. His earlier suspicions confirmed. He had recognized something in her eyes that others had missed. The look of someone trained for exactly these moments. Someone carrying a legacy of service and sacrifice. Outside the aircraft, F-22 fighters took positions that would ensure safe passage for all civilian and military aircraft in the area. The hostile situation that had been developing was neutralized not through violence, but through the simple application of proper authority and tactical knowledge. Mara's voice remained calm and professional as she coordinated the resolution. All stations, this is Falcon's Heir. Threat neutralized. Airspace secured. Normal operations may resume. The response came from multiple military frequencies simultaneously. Copy. Falcon's Heir. Threat neutralized. Airspace secured. Thank you for your service. As the immediate crisis passed, Mara carefully folded the silver patch and returned it to her canvas bag. Her demeanor shifted back to the quiet, unassuming person who had boarded the flight. But now everyone understood that her humility was a choice, not a limitation. The transformation in the cabin atmosphere was complete. Where there had been dismissal and mockery, there was now respect and amazement. Passengers who had been laughing at her just minutes earlier were now looking at her with something approaching awe. The flight attendant who had initially supported Mara approached with a glass of water and a quiet apology. "I'm sorry for how you were treated earlier, and thank you for what you just did." Mara accepted the water with a gentle smile. "You kept the cabin calm during a difficult situation. That takes its own kind of courage." The man in 11C attempted to approach her with stammering apologies, but Mara's response was measured and professional. "The official report is sufficient. Let's leave it at that." Her handling of both the military crisis and the personal aftermath demonstrated a maturity and grace that made her earlier treatment by fellow passengers seem even more inappropriate. As she returned to her seat in row 10, the cabin had become a different place. The young woman who had been sleeping just an hour earlier had revealed herself to be someone with capabilities that commanded respect from military forces around the world. The elderly gentleman in 12D caught her eye and nodded with deep respect. He understood, perhaps better than the others, the weight of what they had just witnessed. Military call signs like Falcon's Heir weren't awarded lightly. They represented legacies of service, sacrifice, and exceptional capability. The aircraft continued its journey toward Chicago. But the passengers aboard would never forget the night they learned that true authority often comes in unexpected packages, and that the most powerful people are sometimes the ones who seem the most ordinary. Radio chatter confirmed the complete resolution of the crisis, with normal air traffic patterns resuming throughout the region. But in certain military circles, word was already spreading that Falcon's Heir was active again, carrying forward a legacy that commanded instant respect across all branches of service. As Mara settled back into her seat, she appeared once again to be just another passenger on a routine flight. But everyone aboard now understood that appearances could be profoundly deceiving, and that respect should be earned through character and capability, not assumed based on age, gender, or first impressions. As the aircraft settled back into routine flight operations, Mara returned to row 10 as quietly as she had left it. Her white shirt remained crisp and professional, and she seemed to slip back into the role of an ordinary passenger as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But the cabin atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The dismissive comments and mocking laughter had been replaced by respectful silence and genuine appreciation for what they had all witnessed. A young flight attendant approached with a fresh bottle of water, her manner completely different from the earlier interactions. "Excuse me, miss. I wanted to apologize for the treatment you received earlier, and to thank you for what you did." Mara looked up with a gentle smile. "You handled the cabin beautifully during a stressful situation. That takes real skill." The elderly gentleman in seat 12D slowly made his way over to Mara's row, carrying an old photograph. The image showed a young soldier in desert fatigues, with the distinctive silhouette of an A-10 aircraft visible in the background. He handed the photo to Mara, who accepted it with both hands and studied it carefully before returning it with a respectful bow of her head. No words were exchanged, but the gesture carried deep meaning for both of them. A little girl from row 9 tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "Mommy, did the nice lady save everyone?" Her mother nodded solemnly, understanding that her daughter had witnessed something she would remember for the rest of her life. The man from seat 11C eventually gathered the courage to approach Mara, his earlier arrogance replaced by embarrassed humility. "I owe you an apology. I was completely wrong about you." Mara's response was gracious, but firm. "The official report will suffice. No additional apology is necessary." Her handling of the situation demonstrated the same professionalism she had shown during the crisis, measured, appropriate, and focused on moving forward rather than dwelling on past mistakes. Throughout the cabin, conversations had shifted dramatically. Passengers who had been quick to judge based on appearances were now questioning their own assumptions about the people around them. An older businessman who had initially supported the critical comments about Mara was now speaking quietly to his seatmate. "Makes you wonder who. Else we might have misjudged over the years." The transformation wasn't just about respect for Mara. It was about a fundamental recognition that authority, competence, and heroism often come in unexpected forms. The passengers had learned a lesson about the danger of assumptions and the importance of recognizing that everyone carries their own story. Flight attendants noted the change in cabin dynamics with professional satisfaction. What had started as a flight with tension and social friction had become a community united by shared experience and mutual respect. As the flight continued toward Chicago, passengers found themselves engaging in more genuine conversations. The artificial barriers that had separated them earlier, age, appearance, perceived social status, seemed less important after witnessing how wrong such judgments could be. Social media posts began appearing as passengers shared their experience. Though most were careful not to reveal specific details about Mara's identity or capabilities. The hashtag #Never Judge a Book began trending, with travelers sharing stories about times they had underestimated fellow passengers. The aircraft's crew made note of the incident in their official log, documenting both the successful resolution of the external crisis and the internal lesson about passenger interaction and respect. As they approached Chicago airspace, air traffic control cleared them for approach with unusual priority, and passengers could see F-22 escorts maintaining protective distance, a final reminder of the extraordinary capabilities of the quiet woman in row 10. The flight that had begun with mockery and dismissal was ending with respect and humility, proving that sometimes the most important journeys happen not between destinations, but between assumptions and understanding. The next morning, news outlets carried only brief reports. F-22 training exercise completed successfully. No further comment. The name Falcon's Heir disappeared from official records as quickly as it had appeared. But, in certain circles, the story took on a life of its own. The elderly gentleman from Seat 12D wrote in his military blog, "That night, the sky held its breath to listen to a single name being spoken." The man from Seat 11C found that the experience had changed him fundamentally. He began approaching interactions with more humility, having learned the hard way that appearances could be profoundly deceiving. His assumption that authority belonged only to people who looked like him had been shattered in the most dramatic way possible. Other passengers carried their own lessons forward. Parents used the story to teach their children about respect and the danger of making assumptions. Business travelers found themselves looking more carefully at their fellow passengers, wondering what hidden strengths and capabilities surrounded them. The following morning in Chicago, Mara sat in a small coffee shop near the airport, wearing the same white button-down shirt and business skirt, old headphones draped around her neck. To any observer, she looked exactly like what she had appeared to be on the plane. A young professional starting another ordinary day. She placed the worn silver patch on the table beside her coffee, sunlight catching the scratched metal surface and revealing details that spoke of history, service, and sacrifice. The barista, making conversation while cleaning nearby tables, noticed the patch. "That's an interesting piece. What is it?" Mara looked up with the same gentle smile she had shown throughout her journey. "A promise," she said simply. The response carried layers of meaning that the barista couldn't fully understand, but the quiet confidence in Mara's voice suggested it was a promise that had been kept, and would be kept again whenever circumstances required. As she prepared to leave the coffee shop and continue with whatever ordinary day awaited her, Mara reflected on the previous night's events. She had not sought recognition or dramatic revelation. Circumstances had simply required her to step forward when others could not. The lesson extended far beyond one aircraft or one crisis. In a world quick to judge based on appearance, age, gender, or first impressions, the story served as a powerful reminder that strength, wisdom, and capability often come in unexpected packages. Military forums quietly discuss the incident in coded language, recognizing that certain call signs carried authority that transcended normal command structures. But for most people, the story became something simpler and more universal. A reminder to treat everyone with respect, because you never know who might be sitting next to you. Those who appear quiet and unassuming often hold the sky in their hands, and the most powerful voices are sometimes the ones that speak softest until the moment they're truly needed. If you believe in stories that touch the heart like this one, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to SN Quiet Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Real people are creating and telling stories, not mass-produced AI.